I was barely 7 years old when my parents separated. I didn't know whose fault it was because I had never seen them argue intensely before. There were light-hearted disagreements, as is common in any marriage, but one day my father came home extremely angry, accusing my mother of something, while my mother vehemently denied it. This argument eventually led to my mother going back to her parents' home. Perhaps I was an innocent child in search of happiness, but the conflicts between my parents pushed me into darkness. My grandfather tried to talk to my father and begged him, but the resentment he felt couldn't be undone, and he eventually divorced my mother. My father wanted to keep me with him, but my mother and grandfather didn't agree. So my father gave up on that request, and I started living with my mother. A year after my father divorced my mother, he remarried and settled into a new family. On the other hand, my mother was also waiting for the right time, and she remarried as well. She left me at my grandparents' house and moved away. My grandmother had passed away, and my grandfather was very weak and old. After my mother's second marriage, he lived for only another 7 months. So now I was at the mercy of my uncle and aunt. My uncle had applied for immigration to Canada a long time ago, and during this period, his application was accepted. He sold the house and everything else and moved to Canada with my aunt. They left me with a distant relative named Lala Rook. Before leaving, my uncle contacted both my mother and father. My father apologized, but his second wife wasn't willing to take me in, and my stepfather also refused. So the only option left was for me to be handed over to Lala Rook, who agreed gladly and even pleaded with my uncle and aunt, saying, "Give me Nita, I'll treat her like my own daughter." Lala Rook had 3 young sons, but no daughter, and she deeply desired to have a daughter. She begged my uncle to let me stay with her, and he agreed, believing that I would be in safe hands. Lala Rook was very beautiful, and when she came to see me, she would shower me with love. I liked her because she treated me well. I loved looking at her beauty. She wore very beautiful and fashionable clothes that everyone admired. I was only 8, and while I couldn't afford such things, I could certainly admire them. When Lala Rook asked me to stay with her, I was happy because being separated from my parents had hurt me deeply. I had to bear the loss of my grandfather, who had been very kind to me. My uncle and aunt had also treated me well, but now they were leaving, and it wasn't possible for them to take me with them. In the beginning, Lala Rook took great care of me. My mother would visit occasionally, but I had grown emotionally distant from her. As a child, I couldn't understand her struggles, and all I wanted was her closeness. When that wasn't available, I drifted away from her. Over time, my feelings grew even colder. I thought to myself, this stranger seems better than my real mother. She sacrificed me to create her own family, and Lala Rook has given me the love I was longing for. Now, whenever my mother visited, I would refuse to speak to her. I would show my displeasure by pushing her gifts aside and never touching them. After seeing my behavior, my mother stopped visiting. Perhaps she felt at peace, knowing that I was happy with Lala Rook, surrounded by everything I wanted, love and affection from her children and myself. However, gradually Lala Rook's behavior started changing. I later found out that her true desire wasn't to have a daughter, but instead, she wanted someone to take care of her 3 children and manage all the household chores. She needed a servant who would stay with her and serve her family. Lala Rook had promised my uncle and aunt that she would enroll me in school, and she did. She was bound to keep her promise of educating me. She enrolled me in a nearby school, and I used to walk to school every day. A girl from the neighborhood, Nina, who was also my classmate, would go with me. When I was at school, Lala Rook would be busy and exhausted because of the housework and taking care of the children. She couldn't hire a maid because she didn't trust anyone. As soon as I came back from school with my bag still in hand, she would say, "Nita, hurry up, change your uniform, and come to the kitchen." After that, she wouldn't let me sit down until 10 p.m. She would keep me busy with one task or another, so much so that I didn't even have time to do my homework. And every day my teacher would scold me. Lala Rook put so much pressure on me with the housework that I became emotional and often ended up crying. But the worst part was that I had no one to turn to, no one to share my sorrow with. Life became a constant struggle. While my mother still kept in touch, she eventually cut off all ties with me. Lala Rook, seeing that I was now without any family, showed no compassion and didn't care for me anymore. In the harsh cold winter, she would make me wash dishes with cold water, clean the kitchen, scrub the floors, clean the school shoes, wash the children's dirty clothes. Essentially, all the work she herself wouldn't do, she made me do. Even when I had a fever, she didn't care. She would just keep giving me tasks, never allowing me a moment of rest. I couldn't have imagined that the woman I once liked would turn out to be so cruel, depriving me of even a minute of comfort. One day when I was in the ninth grade, it started raining heavily as I was returning from school. We had only walked a short distance, but we were completely drenched. There was nowhere to take shelter from the rain. Suddenly, a motorbike pulled up beside us, and a young man on it said to Nina, "Sit down and take your friend with you. I'll drop you both homes." Nina replied, "This is my aunt's son, Rashid," and immediately got on the bike, asking me to join her. I hesitated, fearing what Lala Rook might think, especially if her husband saw me with a young man. Lost in those thoughts, another young man came up and stopped his bike, telling Rashid, "You go, I'll take them home." Rashid started the bike and drove off. I stood in the middle of the road staring after them, while the other young man called out, "How long are you going to stand here in the rain? It's getting worse, don't be stubborn." "Rashid is my friend, and I go to his house regularly. I also know where you live. Come on, get on the bike. You'll get sick standing here in the rain." I was shocked to see Nina, my friend, casually riding with an unknown boy on a bike. The boy on the bike was now directly addressing me, saying, "I see you every day on your way to school. You're not a stranger to me. You live with Murad and Lala Ruch. I know everything about you. Hurry up or you'll get sick from the cold." His words made me reluctantly get on the bike. Indeed, I was feeling terribly cold, drenched from head to toe. He dropped me at the door of my house and left. But unfortunately, Lala Rook's husband had been watching from the window. He saw me getting off the motorbike with the young man and immediately told his wife, "She's come back with some boy. Ask her who it was." Lala Rook, eager to find a reason to punish me, slapped me repeatedly without asking anything. She grabbed me by the hair and shook me violently. I started crying, but she didn't let me explain. The next day, she stopped me from going to school, finding this as a perfect excuse to keep me at home. She wanted to remove me from school altogether. After that, she loaded me with all the housework while she enjoyed her comfort. Her plan had been fulfilled. I was upset with Nina for leaving me alone in the rain and for allowing my situation to become so terrible. But what could I do now? My friendship with Nina had ended. My thoughtless actions had led to my destruction. When Nina would come, I would speak to her with indifference. Nina herself realized the harm she had caused me. Not only had the doors of education been closed for me, but after that incident, Lala Rook started treating me worse than a stepmother would. Initially, my uncle and aunt would call and inquire about my well-being from Lala Rook, but eventually their calls stopped. It seemed like, despite having relatives, I had become completely orphaned. Lala Rook would wake me up early every morning, no matter the weather, and I had to make breakfast. After that, she never hired a maid or servant, and she kept me working tirelessly from early morning until late at night. She would slap me at the slightest mistake, keeping me fearful. Sometimes, Nina's mother would tell Lala Rook, "Have some mercy, don't treat the poor girl so badly." To which Lala Rook would reply, "Can't you see? She's growing up. If I don't keep a tight grip on her, she'll leave the house. I have my husband here, and men can be easily swayed. I have to keep an eye on her at all times." I couldn't understand why Lala Rook was so fearful and paranoid, but over time, she became more and more controlling and suspicious. She would even refuse to give me enough food, fearing that if I ate enough, I would grow attractive. In the mornings, I would get only one roti and a little leftover curry from the previous night, and in the evening, another roti. The house was filled with fruits, sweets, cakes, and all sorts of delicious food, but I wasn't allowed any. If food went bad, she would throw it away in the trash. I would be left yearning for even the smallest bite. As I grew older, I felt hungry constantly, and with all the work I was doing, I became even more exhausted. Often at night, when I didn't have enough food to fill my stomach, I couldn't sleep because of hunger. Lala Rook also gave me ugly, worn-out clothes, so I wouldn't look good. Even though her husband wasn't bad-looking, she became increasingly insecure. She started to think that her husband might take an interest in me because I was growing up. Her paranoia made her life and mine miserable. She would beat me, scold me, and punish me for the smallest mistakes. She even stopped me from washing my face or brushing my hair, keeping me dirty and unkempt, so I wouldn't look appealing. Despite my efforts to make myself look ugly, my natural beauty would shine through even in dirty clothes. During this time, new tenants moved in next door. Their son, Rehan, was a kind and handsome young man. He was Nina's cousin because her father had arranged for his brother to move into the vacant house next door. When Rehan heard about my situation from Nina, he felt sympathy for me. Whenever Lala Rook would hit me with a wooden stick, I would cry, and my cries would reach the neighboring house. Rehan would hear my source and feel distressed. He would say to Nina, "Go and comfort that poor girl. You can't do much, but at least you can try to cheer her up." Nina, understanding Lala Rook's temperament, would visit me sometimes, though her visits were not appreciated by Lala Rook. One evening when Lala Rook and her husband went to a party and left me to watch the children, I fed them and put them to bed. It was getting late when suddenly the power went out. I went to look for a charging light, but as I was searching, a bug bit my finger. The pain was excruciating, and it became unbearable. I went to the courtyard crying, and someone knocked on the door. I thought it was Lala Rukin and Murad coming back. So I opened the door, but it was Rehan standing there. He asked why I was crying, and I told him a bug had bitten me. He asked, "Does it hurt a lot?" "Yes, it's very painful, and it's getting worse," I replied. He said, "Maybe it was a scorpion bite. Should I call Uncle Amir? He's the neighborhood doctor." Rehan quickly went to call him. Uncle Amir came and gave me an injection. The moment the injection was given, I felt relief, and the pain disappeared, but my hand still felt sore. My hand had gone numb, and Rehan and Uncle Amir had left. I started praying for them, thanking them for their help. If they hadn't intervened, I would have been left screaming in pain. At midnight, when Lala Rook and Murad returned, I intentionally avoided mentioning my pain to them because I didn't want to fuel any more doubts in Lala Rook's heart regarding Rehan. The next morning, when Murad was about to leave for the office, he coincidentally ran into Dr. Amir. The doctor asked, "How is the girl now? How is the pain?" Murad replied, "She is fine." But when he returned home, he asked in front of Lala Rook, "Nita, what happened last night? Did something bite you? Did you go to the doctor?" I had no choice but to tell the truth. I explained that I had been bitten by a scorpion and that I had been crying out in pain when Rehan heard me and brought the doctor. "Why didn't you tell us earlier?" Murad asked. "You came home late, and I couldn't tell you," I replied. I was silent after that, and Lala Rook's anger intensified. She scolded me, saying, "How dare Rehan come to our door in our absence and bring a doctor with him? What is going on? Have you two been conspiring behind our backs? Did you invite him inside when we were gone?" When Lala Rook beat me, my screams echoed, and Rehan heard them. Coincidentally, Nina was at their house that day. Later she told me, "When Rehan heard your cries, he was also crying." Her words brought tears to my eyes. After that, Rehan became even more concerned about me. We both spent our days thinking about each other, silently yearning from opposite sides of the wall. As my suffering grew, I became a mere skeleton, unable to bear the torment. Lala Rook's cruelty reached a point where she shaved my head, claiming that I had lice and that I could spread them to her children. In reality, she just wanted to make me look ugly. They say that when cruelty exceeds its limits, it becomes medicine. Allah heard my cries, and one day when I was crying after seeing my bald head in the mirror, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, I couldn't hold back my tears. It was my uncle and aunt, who had come from Canada to visit me. They were shocked to see me bald and immediately asked what had happened. That day, Lala Rook wasn't home. She had gone shopping. I told my uncle and aunt everything, and they decided to take me with them to Canada. When Lala Rook came home, I told her what had happened. She resisted and begged them not to take me, but they didn't listen. I went with my uncle and aunt. They immediately started looking for a suitable match for me. 3 months later, when they had to return to Canada, I insisted on meeting Nina. She took me to her house, and it was there that I learned that Rehan wanted to marry me. The proposal was great, and Nina's mother agreed to the match. But I felt ashamed because I was bald. How could a bald girl get married? But Rehan and his family accepted me as I was. They said, "Hair will grow back. What matters is that we saw how much pain this girl has gone through. We cannot leave her in this state. We want to bring happiness to her life. I was overwhelmed with happiness and felt cared for in a way I never had before. On my wedding day, I still had very little hair, and I was self-conscious, covering my head with a veil. Rayhan, however, kept reassuring me, saying, "You look even more beautiful without your hair." He made me realize that love doesn't see physical flaws, it sees the heart. True beauty lies in the eyes of the one who loves you. Rayhan called me prettiest bald bride, and whenever I remember those days, sometimes I laugh and sometimes my eyes fill with tears. As for Lala Rook, she completely lost her mental stability. She kept accusing her husband of eyeing other women, which led to Murad divorcing her and taking their 3 children away. The cruelty she had once shown me was now being directed toward her own children. But despite everything, I continued to pray to Allah. "Oh Allah, don't let anyone suffer as I did." Amen.